Hillsborough happened on a sunny afternoon in 1989. For many, it's a disaster which has lasted for 23 years.
Perhaps there's been a problem with the gates or the turnstiles at that end, but there are too many people in the Liverpool end of the ground, and that's the top and bottom of it.
96 football fans went to watch Liverpool in the FA Cup semi-final. They never came back.
We drove up there that morning, a family, and we drove home a couple.
Crushed on the terraces, the survivors remember their desperate plight.
It was like a vice getting slowly turned.
And it was just getting tighter, and you could literally feel yourself about to pass out.
Newspaper coverage has been damned. The Sun caused outrage, but the seeds were sown earlier.
You've seen it, it's there. I can't deny that you see my name on it, so it's no good me saying it's not true.
Now we know senior police covered up the truth, but some officers say they were affected too.
Marriages have fallen apart. Officers have attempted suicide. Officers are on a concoction of medication for the rest of their life.
They've had inquests, inquiries and investigations, but the Hillsborough families just wanted the truth.
The Hillsborough families have had law galore. You know, they have had a belly full of law, but they have never had justice.
Now the truth is out, and this week a landmark moment after 2 decades, an apology from the top.
On behalf of the government, and indeed our country, I am profoundly sorry.
A massive trawl of previously private papers and other material has thrown a new perspective on the disaster. Here at the Liverpool Records Office, they've supplied just some of the documents which have been reviewed by the Hillsborough Independent Panel. This programme will look at the history of Britain's worst sporting disaster and find out how, after all this time, new information has come to light.
It was a glorious day, and it was my favourite game. 20 years of age, young lad, loved his footy. 3 mates I went with in a car full of expectancy. Liverpool were coming up on the rails after what had been a comparatively stuttering season.
The best way I can describe the day is recalling a man with a big haversack selling sunglasses and saying £1 a pair to keep out the glare.
Everything felt as it should.
The FA Cup semi-finals, Wembley or bust. These are the great matches to win and the worst possible ones to lose. Just think of what's at stake. For Liverpool, a cup and league double again.
On the 15th of April 1989, 24,000 Liverpool fans made the journey across the Pennines to watch their team play Nottingham Forest at Sheffield Wednesday's neutral Hillsborough Stadium. The same 2 teams had met at the same stage of the FA Cup competition here the year before as well. And on both occasions, the Liverpool supporters were allocated the Leppings Lane end of the ground, something many were angry about, feeling it too small for the number attending. The match was scheduled to kick off at 3 o'clock. But with half an hour to go, some of the fans already inside the stadium began to feel uncomfortable.
Nice and green, sunny day, and everything was fine until about 2:30. And you just started to think, well, it's getting really, really tight in here, and it started to get kind of tighter and tighter. And by about 25 to 3, maybe 20 to 3, people had stopped talking about the game and were starting to get very anxious.
Outside the ground, things were getting worse too. With just 23 turnstiles for the Liverpool fans to use, a bottleneck started to build. And it was here that a crowd of more than 5,000 fans had built up when the police decided to open a wide exit gate just after 10 to 3. The now infamous Gate C was open for just 5 minutes, But during that time, more than 2,000 people poured through it and into the already full pens.
We suddenly noticed there was people starting to go in, and you could see that what transpired as a gate had been opened. So no, we can go through there, and that suddenly relieved the pressure. And me and my friends all went in through that gate C, which we found out later. And basically we're in the concourse area straight away, didn't have to show our tickets. If we'd had to show our tickets and go through the turnstiles, we'd have been there 3:45 trying to do it.
Colin Moneypenny was one of the Liverpool supporters stuck in the crush, trying to get into the ground. When Gate C opened, he followed the crowd in and found himself heading down the central tunnel towards the pens.
There wasn't a single policeman or steward in the entire area, in the concourse area. There was no one saying, despite experiences they'd had the year before, and what had happened the year before, saying, don't go down that tunnel. The only thing you can see is the tunnel which just takes you down to the terrace. So if there's no one there telling you anything otherwise, like lots of other people, like a lemming, you just go down the tunnel, and it was a tunnel that nearly took me to my death. I was just lifted off my feet and carried, I estimate 30 to 40 foot to what I know was pen 3, towards where a crush barrier later found out had collapsed. And I was just taken off my feet and landed on tiptoe, you know, quite near the front of the pens.
So, on a clear sunny day at Hillsborough, the stage is set for a rerun of last year's classic, Liverpool in red.
The match had kicked off on time, the players and officials on the pitch not realising what was happening on the terraces. Ray Lewis was the match referee.
It was just a normal game. There was movement behind the Leppings Lane goal, but that really only thought, well, there may be too many people in one of the areas there, and the police were just moving them from one area to another. So, you know, one didn't really take too much notice that there was a problem there.
Beardsley! Oh, he's hit the bar! Tremendous!
And then we just had this, you know, the policeman onto the field of play, which is most unusual, tapping me on the shoulder saying, you know, we've got some problems, you know, can you take the players from the field of play?
There's an overflow behind the goal, and the police inspector is on the pitch. And they've come through the barriers, and I can only think that's overcrowding. It doesn't look to me to be any sort of misbehaviour.
Peter Carney and Damien Kavanagh were both on the terraces at Leppings Lane.
You know, all the shirts, Kavanagh 2, James 3, you know, our name, no one else's, like, you know.
They've become friends since, and now realise that that afternoon they were about 100 yards apart, both experiencing the crush.
It was like a vice getting slowly turned, you know, so it wasn't like, you know, something came up and shocked us. It was just getting worse and worse, and we were shouting to the police right in front of us. They could hear us, they could clock us, you know, open the gates. And I remember making eye contact with one constable who just looked at me and basically just mouthed at me and just went like that, get back.
Slowly I was losing my breath and stuff like that, and it was hurting, you know, couldn't get my arms up by my side, and we were screaming at the coppers on the other side of the fence and that, and they just completely blanking us.
I was able to lever myself up because I like my hands and that, and there's a fella who wouldn't recognise him. Never seen him again. He just said, yeah, mate, and because his hand was stuck, but he could help me foot, and a policeman grabbed hold of us right there and then like almost threw me, and I just sort of like fell onto the dirt track, the shingle track around the back of the goal.
I think I fell into a pocket of air and I've been able to breathe again, and then at some point somebody's picked me up off the thing and passed me overhead.
And there are fans climbing up from the terrace to try and get refuge in the seats now.
People were obviously dying on their feet, and as they died they couldn't fall because there was no room for them to fall.
What started as an uncomfortable squeeze had become a fatal crush. Without enough emergency help, fans started using billboards to carry the dead and injured themselves.
There were so many bodies on the pitch, you didn't have to move 10 yards to pick someone up. And we picked this lad up, and he was just about alive when we picked him up. And before we we took off and we ran down the pitch towards the forest end, because we thought that ambulances and medics would be there. And by the time we got to the far end, he was dead.
The death toll rose throughout the afternoon. By the end of that day, 95 fans had been killed, with the final total later reaching 96. The match had been stopped at 6 minutes past 3. It was later ruled that all the victims were dead by 3:15. But this week the Hillsborough panel proved that the coroner Stefan Popper was wrong to have made that assessment. For the first time, the full inadequacy of the ambulance service response has been exposed. Those called to the ground were parked up outside. Just one made it onto the pitch. Tony Edwards was the paramedic on board.
Somebody was coming by on a billboard and people were waving to us to stop, and they were carrying a body on the billboard. Bearing in mind, we had no idea what we were going into. People were asking and pulling at me and asking for oxygen and defibs. At that point, we were the only South Yorkshire ambulance at the epicentre of the disaster. This is where most people died. And at that point, when we were on, in fact, at no other point were there ambulance crews sent on to the epicentre. They just didn't go there.
15-year-old Kevin Williams died at Hillsborough. His family believe at 4 o'clock. This photograph, taken at 3:15, shows the teenager being carried on a billboard by fans, including Steve Hart.
I knew we needed to get him to medical people, but I knew for a fact he wasn't dead. I knew that for a fact, and we all did, for the simple fact we couldn't run any quicker down the pitch. And we lays him down, and then calls the police officer standing there. He says, you know, he needs help. He said, "Use just F off on down the other side." And that was his exact words. That's exactly what he said. Just F off down the other end and leave him there. And like an idiot, I did.
This week, shockingly, it's been revealed that 41 victims, including Kevin Williams, might have been saved, and that the 3:15 cut-off was wrong. Now pressure is mounting for new inquests.
Because of what the disclosure process has revealed, it's shown that there isn't and wasn't a justification for the 3:15 cut-off, and for that reason there should be the opportunity for the inquest process to be rerun.
Let's move beyond 3:15. I don't care if you want to take that cut-off time right through to 12 o'clock at night, but let's investigate everything as if people had the potential to be rescued. Let's not say they didn't have any potential to be rescued after 3:15. Because it feels like it's a cover-up.
Tony Edwards' ambulance took 15-year-old Victoria Hicks to hospital, but she was found to have died. Her mother, Jenny Hicks, later found out that her other teenage daughter, Sarah, had also been killed. Margaret Aspinall's 18-year-old son, James, died at Hillsborough, and Pat and Peter Joyne's newly married son, Nicholas, was killed too. He was 27. Early on, they started to feel that the fans, their relatives, were being set up to take the blame for what had happened.
What made it more difficult for us at the time as well to try and get to the truth of Hillsborough was because we are fighting the establishment. And that, to me, made it so much more difficult for us.
They felt they needed a common voice to represent their interests, and so the Hillsborough Families Support Group was born, the first of 3 formal groups which cater for those affected by the disaster.
I was introduced to Mrs Thatcher. She gave her sympathies to myself and my wife, and she said, you know, do you have anything to say about it? So I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, it seems as though there's a cover-up. There will be a cover-up to the tragedy. And she said in that drawl of hers, Mr Joynes, I can assure you there will be no cover-up. And I'm here 23 years on, still thinking there was a cover-up that day.
Margaret Thatcher and her Home Secretary Douglas Hurd visited Hillsborough to be briefed by the Chief Constable Peter Wright. It's now known that he believed the fans had been drunk and ticketless. Much later, Mrs Thatcher's Press Secretary Bernard Ingham blamed the tragedy on a tanked-up mob. The 1981 riots in Brixton and Toxteth and the miners' strike in 1984 were recent history when Hillsborough happened.
Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
The police had been pitched against protesters and picketers, and football fans were known for fighting too.
You've also got to remember how football supporters were looked at in the 70s and 80s. They didn't have the profile that we had now. I mean, they had a terribly bad reputation, so really the fans who died at Hillsborough and the supporters there were prime targets.
We got stopped by police at the county line. They said, go
The Hillsborough panel has uncovered the extent to which South Yorkshire Police tried to avoid criticism. It's found that a unit of 5 senior officers worked to build the police case. 116 officers' witness statements were amended to shift blame from the force. Words like panic and useless were removed or changed.
A lot of cup semi-finals at Hillsborough.
Patrick McGinley was a South Yorkshire Chief Inspector. He went to police headquarters on the afternoon of the disaster.
Firstly, I'd never seen so many bosses about on a Saturday afternoon. And the second thing was, there was a real gloom, a sinisterism almost about police headquarters. The 4th floor, which is the boss's suite really, there were officers like huddled in groups talking.
Patrick says at the time he believed his fellow senior officers were honourable, but having learned this week of their activities, he now feels cheated.
Every one of us, our hearts bleed for the Hillsborough families and the deceased. I'm a Christian like many other people. I pray every day of my life for those families and the people that went to heaven. But I also pray for the police family.
Patrick does remember some of the junior ranks worrying about the statement amendments back in 1989.
There was a lot of concern amongst officers, so much so that certainly on more than one occasion a group of officers went before their chief superintendent, marched on block to say, look, we want a thorough discussion about these statements.
Fans say they were also put under pressure to provide statements which would fit the police's story that they'd been drunk at the game. Steve Hart was interviewed by 2 officers, but he says they only wanted to talk about one thing.
The first question, the very first question they asked me was, how much did you have to drink? And I thought, what's specific about that? I asked them, I said, why are you asking me how much I've had to drink? Don't you? Surely you're here to find out why people have died, or, who's to blame. Surely that's your job.
Police efforts to blame the fans had started on the day of the disaster. The first news reports that day included a line given to reporters about the possible reason for the crush.
It appears that hundreds of Liverpool fans without tickets got into the ground through a broken gate.
This explanation had initially been given by the police to the FA, who passed it to journalists. It was later corrected when it emerged that the police had opened Gate C.
They gave orders for a gate to be opened to relieve pressure on some outside turnstiles and allow some 3,000 more fans into the ground.
But some of the newspapers' coverage in the days following the disaster redirected criticism back towards the fans.
Have a look at the Sun headline, the truth. The truth. We urinated on the dead. We attacked people who were trying to save the dying. We attacked coppers who were trying to save the dying. We stole from the dead.
Steve Kelly says he will never buy the Sun again. A member of the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, his brother Michael died at Leppings Lane.
My mother read the fact that somebody might have been urinating on my brother, stealing from his body. Nobody done that. But that gave a perception of Liverpool fans, Liverpool people. When they seen the paper, the Sun newspaper, Mrs Thatcher must have been rubbing her hands, thinking, well, great, you know, this backs up as though they're just thugs, they're just scum.
Because of the actions of Scousers, particularly Scousers, but other people throughout the country, a British newspaper will never, ever again print a headline such as The Truth and tell lies about the dying and the dead and the survivors, you know. And the reason it won't is because the financial cost is ongoing. You know, the Sun newspaper and the Murdoch empire are still paying for that gross lie told.
The Hillsborough panel found that the Sun's incendiary article was written up from information supplied by a Sheffield news agency, White's. But the day before it appeared nationally, a similar report was printed in the Sheffield Star.
There was all this fuss about the Sun and what the Sun said. The Sun, in essence, were actually following what had already been reported locally. They picked it up and they put spin on it, that's for sure.
John Highfield was one of the local reporters who wrote the Sheffield Star piece. This is the first time John has looked at the article since.
You've seen it, it's there. I can't deny that you see my name on it, so it's no good me saying it's not true. I reported, like any journalist should, what they were told. I put no spin on my part of that story. Me and my colleague, we were going around doorstepping people for around 40, saying, what's your experience, what happened to you? And that was what we got back, that there was some drunkenness, there was some rowdiness. We presented a balanced version. There are many truths in a story like this, that's the problem. The Sun, for reasons best known to itself, decided that that was the truth. And that's really what they did wrong, wasn't it? They didn't actually look for balance, I suppose.
Despite years of legal proceedings, the feeling that justice hadn't been done was growing ever more intense when 3 years ago it seemed to explode at the disaster's 20th anniversary memorial service. The crowd demanded justice for the 96, wanting its message to reach the government.
So I sat with them, I agonised about what I would say, the words I would use.
Andy Burnham had chosen to speak at the service knowing that emotions were running high. After the passionate chanting, he later pledged that all information would be released.
It was absolutely essential that we had a process independent of government, independent of the police and other public authorities, to oversee the disclosure of all documents so that the full truth could be told and people could have confidence in that truth. Because I would argue that the story of Hillsborough has been collusion between the public authorities, the establishment if you like, and parts of the media to tell a certain version of events that in the end hasn't proven to be true. And that is what is so wrong, and it's why people here those few years ago rightly shouted at me when I stood up there as the government minister. I've always said if I wasn't the minister that day I'd have been stood there shouting at the minister, because something had to give, something had to happen.
For the last 2 years, the panel and its team of archivists have pored over more than 400,000 pages of documents, statements and photographs, and have viewed CCTV, video and audio material. Some of what they've examined was already publicly available in places like this, the Liverpool Records Office. But exceptionally, they've also been allowed access to material which until now would have been kept private. This week, the panel produced its report and released the documents. Its huge impact is still being absorbed nationally, but in Liverpool the feeling has been of relief and emotion that at last the rest of the country believes what they've been saying for years.
It's been a long, hard struggle for 23 years. It hasn't been an easy journey. It's been a very, very hard one. It's been very, very tiring, and sometimes, you know, you've wanted to give up. But the strength you get from the support you get from all of these people keeps you going. They keep you going. And look where we've got. We've got a little more hurdle to go, but we will get there. And them 96 definitely will rest in peace then.
The future may bring fresh inquests and even criminal prosecutions, but for now the family's achievement is still sinking in. There are many here today who've spent the last 23 years campaigning for the truth and fighting for justice, who've hoped that the panel's report will bring them some kind of peace. Even if they now have the answers they've been looking for, theirs will never truly be a private grief. Instead, it's a sorrow shared by a city. And here, the 96 will never be forgotten.
Remember, when these people died, when 96 people died, the South Yorkshire Police said to themselves, well, the football supporters, they're just scum, and the families will be the families of scum. So they might kick up a fuss for a while, but they'll soon go away. You know, 23 years later, is it 24 years later? They haven't gone away. They're still battling. And every minute that passes is a demonstration of love. These were wonderful, wonderful people with futures, and they were loved. And so this ongoing campaign, I think, has been a massive demonstration of enduring love. Truth and justice, yes, but love above all.